My name is Pete Hegseth, and I'm in for Laura Ingraham on this Wednesday night. And this is the Ingraham Angle, live from New York City. It's almost the new year, and tonight we look at what a difference just 1 year makes with President Trump in the White House. Now, ISIS has been almost wiped off the map completely, losing 98% of its territory, including half of it since President Trump took office. And an American president will be honored in Israel, not just in Israel, but in the old city of Jerusalem. We'll talk to John Bolton about both of these amazing developments. And murder and many crime rates, including the killing of police, dropped this year. We'll debate whether Trump's tough talk and pro-police policies deserve the credit. Meanwhile, the establishment media can't understand, they still cannot understand why President Trump's base still supports this president. We'll examine whether the media's problem isn't the messenger themselves. And Gold Star parents who lost their Navy SEAL son in an Afghanistan firefight credit a key change by President Trump for saving military lives on the battlefield this very day. But we begin with the little notice year-long probe that could have a big effect on the investigation by special counsel Robert Mueller. Last January, the Justice Department's Inspector General, Michael Horowitz, quietly began investigating the FBI and DOJ's handling of the Hillary Clinton email scandal. Now, recently, that inquiry turned up evidence of anti-Trump bias amongst key players in the Russia investigation. Remember those Peter Strzok and Lisa Page texts that talks about an insurance plan? That came from Michael Horowitz's investigation at the IG. Now, all of Washington is waiting to see what other bombshells this investigation may reveal in the new year, and whether this could discredit part or all of the Mueller probe. Joining us now to discuss from Washington, D.C. is Scott Bolden, a Democratic strategist. And with me here in New York City is James Freeman, who is the assistant editor of the Wall Street Journal's editorial page. Gentlemen, both, thank you for joining me this morning. I'm on Fox and Friends all the time, so it's morning or night. I can't get it right. This is the Ingraham Angle. We are here this evening. Scott, let me start with you now that I know where I am. This investigation, Bob Mueller's name is a household name right now. The Democrats are banking through their resistance that he's going to take down this president. The name Michael Horowitz is not one well known, but his investigation has already bore fruit in that, Peter Strzok and others have had to leave the Mueller probe as a result of showing anti-Trump bias. Is this not an investigation, if they show that special treatment was given to Hillary Clinton, that could have serious consequences?
No, I mean, I understand about the Strzok issue, but he was removed. As a former prosecutor, let me just say this. He was not the only decision maker. And until you show that the investigation has been tainted, not just having one investigator that was tainted and was properly removed, you don't have political bias. You can't select people to be on the investigation team, whether it was those who investigated Hillary Clinton or those who are on the Mueller investigation, simply because of a political affiliation. They have to show political bias. And there's nothing there right now, no matter how many times the GOP throws political hand grenades at the Mueller investigation.
Well, Scott, you say that Peter Strzok is not the only one in the investigation. True. Enter Andy McCabe, who's the number two over there, as part of this as well. Now, when the email Clinton investigation was going on, we know now through evidence that Andy McCabe said that this Clinton email investigation should receive special status. There's Andrew McCabe right now. He's also been referred to as Andy in the insurance policy in the text between Strzok and Lisa Page. So if Andy McCabe says special status in this investigation, James Freeman, if the Inspector General is trying to consider whether or not it was a fair investigation, are we not onto something here?
I think we are onto something, and I assume Mr. Bolden and people, or at least Democratic colleagues, were pretty happy when this Horowitz investigation got going, because the idea here was there was a theory in Democratic circles that Mr. Comey at the FBI had put his thumb on the scale and helped Donald Trump get elected. So I think this was I think this was perhaps seen as a way to discredit the Trump administration. Now, as you said quietly, Mr. Horowitz hasn't been leaking, but he appears to have been doing a lot of work, taking a lot of documents, a lot of interviews. He has interviewed Mr. Comey, among others.
Loretta Lynch as well.
Right. And we're going to get a report probably late winter, early spring. And it's focused on the Comey process, not his decisions, but did he follow FBI procedures? And I don't see how anyone can say, yes, he did, because that was one thing that former AGs, former deputy AGs of both parties agreed with, it's kind of been lost now in the intervening months. But there was widespread agreement that former FBI Director James Comey did not follow Bureau procedures when he took upon it himself to announce that there would be no prosecution of Mrs. Clinton, when he shared his thoughts publicly in a press conference about her culpability. That's not what prosecutors do, and he's not a prosecutor. He's supposed to gather the information.
That's right.
Prosecutors make the decision.
Scott, specifically, this DOJ Inspector General is looking at, as was mentioned by James, the review of the Clinton email investigation. Authorities are examining whether the Justice Department and FBI followed establishment policies and procedures. It doesn't feel like established policies and procedures to write the exoneration of the person you're investigating 2 months before you talk to them, and as well as deem this investigation special, which means only a few people at the top of the FBI were actually involved in investigating Hillary Clinton. And I will note, this is very important. No, this is very important to note. This Inspector General launched this report independently before President Trump was president, and he's an Obama appointee. So this is not something President Trump has launched. And why is this getting very little coverage and notice when Bob Mueller is wall to wall on every other network in this city?
Well, Bob Mueller's not done any interviews, quite frankly. It's been the political pundits. That's one thing.
Done a little bit of leaking.
There was nothing unusual. Well, we don't know that either. But there was nothing usual about the Clinton investigation. Politics crept its way in, and there were loud political bangs from day one. So, as a former prosecutor, a special status meant absolutely they were trying to protect the investigation from not only leaks but political comments and to having politics injected into it. I think the Inspector General, we welcome his investigation because it is something that's really important. But I still don't think that if there was something there, we'd have it by now. We did get the emails, don't get me wrong. But again, was there political bias? Was this handled in an inappropriate manner? It certainly was handled in an unusual manner with Comey, and most Democrats hated Comey reopening the investigation or even making public statements. That was unusual, but I think Comey indicated, and I didn't agree with his status or his basis for it, but he laid out his basis for taking these unusual steps. So we welcome the IG investigation. I think Democrats and Republicans ought to be both concerned but relieved once that report comes out.
Well, it'll be very interesting to see what it reveals. James, we hear this investigation, House, Senate investigations, a lot of them going on right now. But through all of those, it has revealed what a lot of people feel like is a FBI DOJ swamp. And we're not talking about the agents that do the great work. It's talking about leadership, whether it's Strzok, Andrew Weissman, who was to attend Hillary Clinton's victory party until it wasn't a victory party. Right. Bruce Orr, his connections, his wife Nellie, to Fusion GPS, and Andy McCabe, James Comey, James Baker, the counsel who had to step down. It seems like a lot of deep state Democrats who have an axe to grind or a political preference, and we all know political preferences, everyone's allowed to have them, but if they start to cloud your judgment or give you reason and rationale to pursue someone for a different reason, how do you not look at that and say, we need to find out more?
Right. The FBI agents, they're allowed to have political opinions, but when you get into extreme bias, that's what we saw in the Strzok texts. That's why Mueller fired him. He would not have fired him if there wasn't that issue of extreme bias. And as this rolls forward, remember, the whole reason the Mueller investigation exists is because Comey was fired. What this Horowitz inquiry is going to do.
And then asked his buddy to leak things to make sure he triggered a special counsel.
Well, this is going to shine a light once again on the fact that Mr. Comey deserved to be fired. The reputation of the FBI was in tatters last year because of what he was doing in conducting his investigation into the emails. And what this is going to do is bring up a lot of issues that were kind of tossed aside or forgotten when the focus moved to Mr. Trump, when he started talking about the reasons he fired Mr. Comey. If you go back to May and you look at Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein's memo, it laid out chapter and verse on how Mr. Comey had violated longstanding procedures. It quoted officials from both parties over the years saying this is antithetical to the interests of justice. I think Horowitz is now looking into that. That's a problem for Comey and for Mueller.
Wow.
Yeah, but my goodness,
briefly, 20 seconds, that's it. Go ahead.
Listen, this is all political rhetoric. You got to show political bias. Show me one document one witness testimony, one
What about the
email
text message that says, Andy, we've got an insurance policy?
Anything. The insurance, and that individual was removed from the campaign.
He wouldn't have been without the Inspector General report, right?
Thank goodness for the Inspector General. But that doesn't show political bias. It means that he was tainted, but the investigation was not tainted.
But he was in charge of the Hillary Clinton email investigation. He was in charge of changing. He changed
not his decision.
Peter Strzok and Andrew McCabe were a part of changing the wording from extremely negligent to gross negligence.
In the end, it was Mueller's call. This is all political conjecture. The Republicans would love to make more of it, but until you have evidence, documentary or otherwise, because the FBI and DOJ, that's really all they're looking at. All you have are these political grenades by the Republicans. I mean, my goodness, if you all don't want any Democrats to be on any of the investigation team, then we're starting to look like a third world country.
Don't worry. There are plenty of Democrats on these investigation teams.
That was the whole point of the Rosenstein memo. Jamie Gorelick, former deputy AG under Bill Clinton. Eric Holder, official in both the Clinton and Obama Justice Departments. Are you discounting what they said about Comey's conduct? If people are going to be on the investigation, then their political support, who they write checks to, if they attend a briefing, if they attend a fundraising, and you're going to say that needs to be investigated? That's nonsensical.
Wow, $675,000 to the wife of the number two in the investigation who's running for Congress. It means something,
well,
especially when
House. And she took money from the state governor and from the state Democratic Party in Virginia. What else is she supposed to do? You want them to be divorced over this?
Perception is extremely important in addition to reality in these particular circumstances.
Perception does not require an investigation. Politically, you may like the fact that they've done this, but that's the art of the deal. There's nothing illegal, inappropriate, unethical about it, and you can't make it that way by merely repeating that conjecture.
The American people are still grateful for the fact that you've got Bob Mueller doing his thing, but the name Michael Horowitz, which is not a household name, who seems to be very political, is digging down to the fact that our Secretary of State had a private server in her home and bleach-bitted 33,000 emails and got away with it, and that makes people feel like the system is rigged differently for them than it would be for someone with political connections. We'll find out. We'll find out what the conclusions are, which is the most important part.
So you want more investigation done to your political enemies.
If the conclusions were based on a swamp that was benefiting Hillary Clinton, of course I want more investigation. A lot of people do.
You just feel that.
We may get evidence of that, and that's the point.
And Obama.
Scott,
give it up. You're obsessed with it.
Scott, we've got to leave it right there. James, we've got to leave it right there. Eventually, we'll get to the bottom, hopefully, in both of these fronts. Thanks, gentlemen. Well, much of Washington stays glued to the Mueller probe. Trump has spent the year scoring some impressive victories overseas, including one that President Obama said was impossible. We'll talk with John Bolton about that in just 1 minute. The Ingraham angle. Well, the barbaric and bloodthirsty ISIS caliphate is suddenly almost extinct, having lost 98% of its territory. A stunning half of that loss came in just the year since President Trump took office. But it wasn't so long ago that ISIS was running rampant, gobbling up large chunks of Syria and Iraq and looking almost unstoppable as a terror army. At least that's what President Obama told us in July of 2015.
This will not be quick. This is a long-term campaign. ISIL is opportunistic and it is nimble. Our strategy recognizes that no amount of military force will end the terror that is ISIL.
Can't beat ISIS with the military. That wasn't just wrong. It was a strategy destined to fail, according to retired four-star Army general and Fox News military analyst Jack Keane.
The Obama administration, despite their claims that this was a top priority, never fired a shot in anger against ISIS, even though the Iraqi government was asking for help for 9 months. That's how long it took. And it took 15 months before we ever went after their oil fields, which is their source of financial strength. That was a strategic blunder that we didn't crush ISIS early on.
That's right. Turns out the JV team wasn't so JV. Well, President Trump didn't just change strategies. Many credit him with unleashing the military by simply changing their rules of engagement, which is critically important on the ground. Joining us now for reaction from Washington is former UN Ambassador John Bolton. Mr. Ambassador, thanks for joining us. So President Obama said that our strategy in Iraq recognizes that no amount of military force will end the terror that is what he called ISIS. Yet it appears to me that it is indeed military force that eradicated the grounds that ISIS held. What is the key difference between what President Trump did and President Obama did?
Well, I think the strategy Obama was pursuing, he described as degrade and ultimately destroy ISIS. And the emphasis was on ultimately. So under his approach, just dragged on and dragged on and dragged on. And the consequence was that ISIS had ample opportunity both to train terrorists to get into Europe and the United States, but also as things finally began to turn, to exfiltrate unknown numbers of its leaders and cadres into other anarchic portions of the world. So we should be happy that the caliphate, the physical caliphate, is just about gone. But unfortunately, the ISIS threat remains, now based in Libya and Yemen and the Afghan-Pakistan border regions, that might have been avoided if we had been really pursuing them harder during the Obama years. Absolutely. A lot of people, guys on the ground, credit the loosened rules of engagement. I know when I was in Iraq and Afghanistan, if I had to call the White House for an airstrike, that's going to inhibit my ability to make decisions on the ground. Now it's captains and majors and colonels making moment-by-moment decisions. How important is that to maintaining momentum and defeating an enemy like we have, which once was the caliphate, which once was the size of Ohio, now reduced to 1,000 lowly fighters? Well, I think it was critical, and I think it reflects what the strategy should have been all along, not degrade and ultimately destroy, economize, save words, destroy, period, close quote. I have to say that because the administration, though, continued to follow the Obama approach of relying mostly on the government of Iraq and its Shia militias. Certainly we helped with the Kurds, we helped with some of the Syrian opposition and other Arab forces, but relying extensively on the Baghdad government, which is effectively a satellite of Iran, we've left now Iran in a very advantageous position in the region for what I fear may be the next conflict. Well, that's very true. The next step in what happens in Iraq and Syria is absolutely critical. But for now, the fact that the caliphate has been defeated, incredibly significant. We'll see how much the rest of this town reports on that development. But I have to get your insight on some news that we found quite interesting. There's something that would not have happened under President Obama. Israel is honoring an American president. The Israelis now plan to name the train station near the Western Wall in the old city of Jerusalem after President Trump. In fact, specifically the transportation minister in Israel has said the Western Wall is the holiest place for the Jewish people, and I decided to name the train station that leads to it after President Trump. That's a big thing. A lot of people might be surprised by that. Why are they so willing to say immediately embrace this president? Well, because of what he's done, because of recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital, and by reversing 8 years of basically anti-Israel American foreign policy. I mean, I'm sure cases of heartburn across the country are rising now as people realize this, but Trump has stood by Israel, and if this decision goes through, it shows that loyalty is rewarded. I think it's a great thing. And it's not just train stations. Jerusalem City Council members proposed changing Saladin Street in the Muslim Quarter to Donald Trump Street. They're looking at new parks are being named and schools even under consideration named after Donald Trump. So the gratitude is palatable, as you mentioned, and as someone who's been to the old city, I know you have as well, the significance of him visiting the Western Wall for the first time in May and then making this change, truly historic. Absolutely. Absolutely. I got to get your take on one last thing, because a report came across my desk. Actually, you brought it to my attention this evening. New report that says that China has been spotted illegally selling oil to North Korea. This is a big development in light of what we're trying to accomplish there and what we've been trying to get China to do. What do you know about this? Look, this is the proverbial fire bell in the night. We've got overhead pictures of tankers lashed up at sea, probably Chinese, probably North Korean, transferring oil to the North Korean tankers. So we have this ecstatic Reuters news report earlier today that says China didn't ship any oil to North Korea in November. What's the source of that? China's own export statistics, as if they're going to tell us the absolute truth. So this is, I think this is very significant, and I think it unfortunately shows that China, yet again, as it has for 25 years, is playing the United States, jiving us, telling us they'll help with the North Korean problem, and then doing precisely the opposite. Very briefly, Ambassador, what is our next step? How do we hit China back on this? Look, I think the president's got to have a conversation with Xi Jinping and say, we are getting very close to the end of the road here. Either you help us in a very significant way, or we're going to be faced with the hard choice on using military force. We know there have been military-to-military discussions about the possible effect of the collapse of the North Korean regime. The Chinese need to get with us on this, or I think we've got to act on our own. That could be true. UN Ambassador John Bolton, thanks a lot. Appreciate your time. Thank you, Pete.
All right. There was also encouraging news on the home front in this 2017, especially where good news is needed most, our crime-ridden big cities. Details coming up. We are back with a stunning example of what a difference a year makes in combating crime. During Obama's last year in office, the killing of police officers by gunfire hit a 5-year high. Now, under President Trump, those killings are down by a remarkable 34%, according to the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund. One big difference may be a simple change in attitude, according to a former high-ranking FBI official.
Well, look, since the days of his campaign, the president went out of his way to thank the men and women in law enforcement for their sacrifice and say that effectively, I stand with you. That is 180 degrees away from the last few years, really going back to 2009 of the Obama administration, where the presumption was that the police were racist, the police did something wrong until proven innocent. And I think that tone, maybe we're sensing or feeling a Trump effect now.
He says a Trump effect. Well, there's more good news. The violent crime rate is down in the nation's 30 largest cities, including the murder rate, according to a study by NYU's Brennan Center for Justice. Violent crime down by 1.1%. Even better news, the murder rate in America's biggest 30 cities dropped by 5.6%. And that includes an 11.9% decline in Chicago, which has had a lot of attention, obviously, for many years, and a 9.8% drop in Detroit. Is this encouraging trend here to stay, and does President Trump deserve the credit? Let's ask journalist Heather McDonald, the author of last year's critically acclaimed book, The War on Cops, How the New Attack on Law and Order Makes Everyone Less Safe. Also joining us is Michael Tobman, a Democratic strategist and former senior aide to Senator Chuck Schumer. Thank you both for joining us this evening. Heather, let me start with you. The previous sound bite that we played, said that the presumption that the police are racist is the way maybe a couple of years ago, and whether it was Black Lives Matter and Barack Obama's presidency, juxtapose that with President Trump. I think we could all would say, hey, he has the presumption that the police are heroes that deserve they deserve his backing and our backing. How much does that ethos affect these rates, or could it?
Well, there's been a sea change in both rhetoric and policy, Pete. It's extraordinary because we did go through 8 years where President Obama took every opportunity to reinforce the false Black Lives Matter narrative that we're living through an epidemic of racially biased police shootings of black men. That resulted in real demoralization among our police forces and depolicing. Officers were reluctant to get out of their cars and make that stop at 2 a.m., questioning somebody hanging out on a known drug corner, hitching up his waistband as if he has a gun, because they were fearful the mainstream media would label them as racist. Today, we have a Justice Department led by Attorney General Sessions, who is trying to reverse some of the anti-cop policies of the Obama administration, and Trump is not serving as an echo chamber for Black Lives Matter movement. I hope that what is going on is that cops are going back to proactive policing, and we can hope that more black lives will be saved this year than were lost in the last 2 years.
Well, certainly the trends look like that may be the case. Michael, I've never walked the beat as a cop, but I have walked the beat on patrol in the military. And if you don't believe in your mission, or you don't think your commander has your back, or your morale, your confidence is low, you are far less likely to be aggressive or take that proactive measure. How much of that morale or confidence and that the restoration of it with this president focusing on it, how much might that actually matter at the ground level?
I think it actually is from the ground level up and not the top down. I think changes in policy with political appointments and even the occupant of the White House does have some say on this. I agree with that point, but I would disagree on many others. I think it's actually to the credit of local policing, city by city. In each of those cities, you discuss those very startling, very encouraging drops in violent crime.
Of course, it's local policing. I totally agree with you.
But yes, morale has a big part of it, and I think that people that whether it's their Patrolmen's Benevolent Association here in New York City, or the police commissioner, or a mayor, and we see constant controversy and tension between the New York City PBA and Mayor de Blasio. But I really think it's a credit to the local policing, and I think attributing it solely to the tough on crime rhetoric candidate Trump and then President Trump does local policing.
So certainly, I don't think you can. Good point. You can't credit it all to the president, but you almost can imagine, what if Colin Kaepernick had taken a knee during the Obama presidency? Would he have been invited to the White House and lauded as a hero? Instead, he was called out specifically by President Trump. You know, law enforcement officers and police officers love the fact that he's a Blue Lives Matter guy, not a Black Lives Matter guy. But that does trickle down. A local guy on the beat really does care whether or not, you know, he's going to be seen as guilty before the action is even taken.
Right. I think that's an excellent example. I would also just point to some of the policies, and I agree that policing is fundamentally a local phenomenon. Nevertheless, there's things that Attorney General Sessions has done that are also sending a very powerful message to cops. He has tried to free departments from the unnecessary and costly consent decrees that the Obama administration put on. He has said to U.S. prosecutors, we want you to go after violent felons and drug felons without worry about the pseudo mass incarceration narrative being used against you. And again, these things are both effective in themselves and they do send a message to cops. Of course, policing and a drop in crime is due to the local cops on the ground, but the narrative matters, and an echo chamber in the White House for a false narrative did a heck of a lot of damage over the last couple of years to the law-abiding residents of inner-city neighborhoods.
I stand corrected, by the way. Colin Kaepernick first kneeled when Barack Obama was president, but the effect, of course, was amplified during this presidency.
None of this should gloss over that there are very real and very serious and historically rooted tensions between law enforcement and professional policing and communities of color throughout the country. That being said, I think that some credit is also due to those in the activist community who realized that their message was being lost in this awful, tragic violence in which law enforcement professionals were losing their lives. Nobody wants that. It was just a tragedy every time that it happened, and I think people understood.
Does that happen though without being called out? Does that happen naturally, or is that?
And that is where I would say that candidate Trump was perhaps uniquely positioned to deliver a message that other candidates felt constrained and unable to deliver. On that point, I would agree, but on the others, I think it's a consequence of local policing.
Well, we've got to leave it right there. A couple of very informed opinions here. Heather McDonald, Michael Tobin.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here tonight. Appreciate it. All right, all this good news this year, and the so-called mainstream media, we call them the so-called mainstream media because they're really mostly the left-wing media, is still trying to figure out why the president is popular with his base. We're going to take a closer look next. Good time to be an American. The economy is humming, Wall Street is booming, and the biggest tax cut in 30 years is on the way. But the so-called mainstream media still can't figure out why President Trump is so popular with the base that elected him. So the Associated Press, AP, that news service, sent a reporter on a field trip to Trump country. But Claire Galafaro came back from Sandy Hook, Kentucky, as mystified as ever by Trump supporters. She couldn't explain why, that, quote, despite the president's dismal approval ratings and lethargic legislative achievements, he remains profoundly popular here in these here mountains. Well, maybe our guest can help her understand. Joining us now is Tim Graham, Director of Media Analysis at the Media Research Center. So when I looked at this article, in the heart of Trump country, you get 9 paragraphs in and you're already talking about nostalgia, dismal approval ratings, lethargic legislative achievements, Trump's white base, ceaseless Twitter taunts. Why can they not resist impugning the very people who sent this man to the White House?
They think this is truth-telling. They think that when they say that Trump basically has no legislative achievements and that he failed to repeal Obamacare, they're going to ignore the tax cut somehow. They're going to ignore the stock market somehow. She mentions it around the edges. Mm-hmm. They're going to somehow, suggest that Obamacare wasn't repealed, although they got rid of the individual mandate, which is the most offensive part of Obamacare. But look, when it comes down to it, you send these people to Kentucky, and the whole method here is to say, why haven't you people changed your minds yet? We've been working on this man since 2015, and you're still standing with him, and it makes them angry and frustrated.
It really,
end up with a story like this.
No, it's a great point. So Claire Galafaro, you do a little meandering on her Twitter feed. Again, she's a reporter at the AP, which is supposed to be a news service, supposed to play it straight down the line. One of her tweets from August 13th of 2017 says, the old saying, when you dance with the devil doesn't change, the devil changes you. She's referring to President Trump. Listen, when I stand up and talk, I'll come out right and say it. I'm a conservative. This is where I'm coming from. This is what I believe. Why do reporters still think they can hide behind a veil of being unbiased, behind AP, and then present something like this with such bias and think that people will just buy it?
And the Twitter pages make this more obvious than ever. It's really easy to say, this is an obnoxious story by this AP reporter. I bet if I go to her Twitter page,
it's as
you're
easy
going to
as
find
that.
more of the same.
I know. I mean, it never fails. Every time I go to that Twitter feed and I say, maybe I'm going to find just a lock, stock, and barrel conservative here. And every time it's usually an East Coast liberal that's living in a bubble, takes a flight to Kentucky, goes to the zoo and meets some Trump supporters, writes up something condescending, and then wonders how in the world is this guy going to get elected again?
And they actually understand what's going on here. They understand that coal state voters want coal to come back. They understand that people in rural Kentucky are not fond of let's make sure there are 7 different forms of transgender public bathrooms in every school. You know, they know why these people don't stand with the Democrats, but they're just going to ignore it all.
They ignore the policies and go to the personal politics of destruction, no doubt. Well, what the media also can't stand is the fact that this president uses his Twitter feed and social media effectively to change the entire conversation. Well, former President Obama had a little something to say recently about social media and a veiled reference to President Trump. Take a listen.
People can have entirely different realities. They can be just cocooned in information that reinforces their current biases. The truth is that on the internet, everything is simplified. And when you meet people face to face, it turns out they're complicated. And you find areas of common ground because you see that things aren't as simple as have been portrayed in whatever chat room you've been in. And it's also, by the way, harder to be as obnoxious and cruel in person.
This, of course, coming in a hard-hitting interview with Prince Harry. He also said he wants to recreate a common space on the internet. It almost sounds like President Obama wants to find a way to create a safe space for the way things used to be, where the old guard protected the information that made it to people, whereas now we can get our information from wherever we want.
Yeah, and they do hate that. They hate social media because it's where people go around the mainstream media, go around the liberal politicians. They can't stand that. But, you know, the phoniest thing a liberal will say, and you see this a lot, you know, we really resent these ideological cocoons. You know, how many interviews did Barack Obama give to Fox News once he became president? I bet you it averaged less than 1 a year.
Maybe 1 at the Super Bowl. Yeah, I can't recall many. Yeah. No, it's true. I mean, the history department at Princeton University, where I went to school, had 1 registered Republican and 36 Democrats. I bet if you went to the failing New York Times around the corner here, you probably aren't going to find many registered Republicans. Why can't they look internally and say, wait, maybe we live in a cocoon too?
Absolutely. John Corey wrote a book about how he was the only guy inside the New York Times that voted for Ronald Reagan, and that's obviously still true.
Well, and they hate this president even more than they hated Ronald Reagan. Tim Graham, thanks a lot for the insight. Appreciate it.
You bet.
All right. One unpleasant trend over this past year has been hate crime hoaxes at colleges. I can barely think of anything worse. Kat Timpf, help us understand what is behind this phenomenon in just a moment. Welcome back. Well, hate crimes by their very nature are terrible, but fake hate crimes can also cause serious damage. And unfortunately, over this past year, we saw a string of highly publicized hoaxes at universities across the country. Fox News contributor Kat Timpf joins us now to go through some of the worst offenses and what's happened since they occurred. Kat, I mean, what an unfortunate trend. Bad enough hate crimes, in this country, but to fake it means you're not only impugning the person that you accused, but also the credibility of yourself. So you've got 3 that you brought with us tonight.
Yeah. First of all, the Air Force Academy, the African-American cadet at the Air Force Academy, he said that there was all of these racist messages on his door.
There you have it on the board right there. Yeah. He said he found a racist message when he came home in his dorm in September, and that caused this reaction, before we get your take, this reaction from the head of that academy.
If you can't treat someone with dignity and respect, then you need to get out. If you can't treat someone from another gender, whether that's a man or a woman, with dignity and respect, then you need to get out. If you demean someone in any way, then you need to get out. And if you can't treat someone from another race or a different color skin with dignity and respect, then you need to get out.
That speech, which the university posted on YouTube, went viral, 1.2 million views. But Kat, what actually happened?
The dude was worried about getting in trouble at school, and he was trying to take attention away from it. And turns out he wrote those messages himself.
So a black student at the academy, who was the one who reported it, was actually the one that wrote the messages.
He wrote the messages himself. And this was a speech, like you said, it went viral, got the attention of Joe Biden, Senator John McCain. It captured all these hearts and minds. And it turned out to be a joke all along. It was just a big hoax. And the problem with that is not just that it, hurts the school, makes the school look bad. It also hurts victims who actually go through these kinds of things in the future, because it makes people less likely to believe it, say, oh, that last one was a hoax, and kind of doubt it, which is completely unfair.
Yeah, insane. And at the Air Force Academy to boot.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, here's another one. A University of Michigan student was convicted of falsely reporting a hate crime after claiming she was attacked for wearing a solidarity pin. She later admitted to using the pin to scratch herself, and she said she faked the attack because of her belief that there had been a surge in hate crimes after the election of Trump, and because she became upset during a women's literature class. Kat, I mean, there's some ferocious women's literature classes.
There's a lot going on here. I've never been so upset in a class that I needed to scratch myself with a pin and then report it to the police that a Trump supporter did it. Absolutely awful. But, she's getting punished. She has to go to jail for 93 days, which is good because these aren't, as we mentioned before, these aren't victimless crimes.
Sure.
And also think of the waste of resources. Law enforcement had to spend time on this case. Taxpayers had to spend money paying law enforcement to do this when they could have been out there, handling real crimes instead of this garbage.
And, of course, it's perpetuating this idea that Trump supporters are committing violence against people that are different than them, which the so-called mainstream media loves to run with. I mean, it feeds this cycle of fake news, of false news, of misleading news that makes Trump supporters look like this town wants them to look.
Right, and really it was just a lady with a safety pin in herself.
And a screw loose.
And, a screw loose, essentially.
Or two, yes.
No literature class is that traumatizing.
I mean, there's some rough literature out there, but keep your safety pin in your pocket.
Yes.
All right, you got one more story for us. It wasn't just the students. Assistant Professor Azhar Hussain of Indiana State University, there he is right there, was arrested after police concluded he had made fake anti-Muslim threats against himself. The university's police chief said officers believed Hussain was trying to gain sympathy by becoming a victim of his own fake threats.
Imagine this.
Come on.
Imagine being such a loser that you have to fake hate crime threats against yourself for attention. I mean, we've become in a place in our society where there's nothing more honorable in some circles than being a victim. It's not good to be successful. It's not good to be rich. It's not good to have things going for you. It's better to have things being done to you so you can be in this position of victimhood, which people think is smart and honorable. This is probably a result of that. Because instead, if you want attention, if you want friends, I'd recommend things like hobbies. Those are a thing, right? People still have hobbies.
Weightlifting, jogging.
Right, jogging, golf.
Playing cards, buying Bitcoin.
Even go to the bar. Go to the bar. That's better than this. Come on.
Why not? Well, that's such a great point about victimology, because it's tied to that first story about the Air Force cadet who ultimately, he wanted to be seen as a victim of racism at the institution. And as a result, he's in other trouble. Well, now he'll be empathy for him and he can stay. I mean, when did victimhood become a card people play? And how much of that is a product of these colleges and universities that now traffic in it?
Right. It's huge on college campuses. The best way to be smart is to write an op-ed in your school newspaper that says, I've discovered this new kind of privilege that everyone has but me. Or I've discovered how I'm being oppressed. And people will say, oh, I didn't realize that. I apologize. I'm sorry. If you're offended, then that's automatically a fact. If you're a victim, then that's automatically a fact. And anybody else who might try to counter you on it, they just don't know what they're talking about because they're speaking from a position of privilege. And that's actually how they have conversations on college campuses now. So in order to be in the most powerful position, you have to be the biggest victim.
Sure, absolutely. I will posit, listen, I understand why there are hate crimes. But the minute we went down the hate crimes trail, we started to criminalize thought. The idea is a crime, no matter what your motivation is.
Right.
If you assault someone or if you rape someone, that's a problem. What your motivation. So once you go down the motivation trail, where does it stop?
Right, absolutely. Everything is a protected class now. Because some people want it to be political as well, to be a protected class. People want all sorts of things to be a protected class. I mean, college campuses, you have people who say white girls can't wear hoop earrings because that's oppressive. I mean, that's the level that we're at.
Are you wearing? Okay, you're not
I didn't. I
oppressing
took
me
mine
today.
out today, and I
Okay,
kind of
good.
forgot to put them back in.
Thank you.
But
Check
I
your
do wear
privilege.
them sometimes, which I suppose I shouldn't. But I think that we need to celebrate success and power instead of trying to be victims.
Absolutely. Kat, Tim, thanks a lot.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
being here. All right, a silver lining, a tough turn here, but a great story for a Gold Star family. Up next, how they fought for a key change in U.S. military policy and why they believe it is saving lives under President Trump. Billy Vaughn joining us next. Welcome back. A simple but very critical change in our military policy is saving American lives on the battlefield. That change might have saved precious lives on August 6, 2011, when the chopper Extortion 17 was shot down during a firefight in Afghanistan, killing all 38 aboard. It was the single largest loss of American life in the history of the Navy SEALs. The dead included SEAL Team 6 member Aaron Vaughn, and his parents, Karen and Billy Vaughn, believe the military's restrictive rules of engagement under President Obama contributed to that travesty. They fought hard to see those rules change, and now that President Trump has done that, they believe those changes are saving lives. And Billy Vaughn joins us now. So, Billy, your story of your son is powerful. He's an American warrior, fought for our country, and from the very beginning, you and Karen have been dedicated to making sure what happened there in that valley in Afghanistan doesn't happen again. How critical have changes in the rules of engagement been to unleashing our military?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me tonight, Pete. And yes, absolutely. After Aaron was killed, and Karen and I began to find out things. And by the way, you know us. We're not military experts. We're parents who love our son and love our country and our military. Mm-hmm. And after we began to find out things that happened that night, things that should have happened that didn't happen, we do believe there are many things that happened that night. If even just one of them hadn't happened, Aaron and those men may be alive today. And, President Trump promised he would change the rules of engagement. Karen actually spoke at the RNC convention for President Trump and talked about the rules of engagement needing to be changed. And mm-hmm. both of us talked across the country about that. And we were able to meet with then candidate Trump and with other Gold Star families. And Pete, you know this. We've got the most powerful, the most efficient military the world has ever seen. Our warfighters can go out and crush the enemy every single night if they're allowed to do, if they're unleashed to do what they are trained to do. And under President Obama, that just didn't happen.
If they are allowed. Now, you caveated yourself saying you're not a military expert. I get that. But that it almost allows you to bring more common sense to the discussion and certainly investment with your son. A lot of people who haven't been in the military, they'd say, what are these rules of engagement? What is the rationale for putting political constraints on warriors on the battlefield as opposed to unleashing them, especially against a threat like ISIS?
Well, okay, let me give you, for instance, on the night that Aaron was killed, there was no pre-assault fire before the helicopter went in. And that's one that you don't have to be a military expert to know.
Prepping
Anybody
the target,
sitting at home
absolutely.
watching. Yes, sir. And and that wasn't just an isolated incident. The helicopter pilots, when they were given testimony, both of them. One of them said there's a 1 in a million chance we can get pre-assault fire approved. The other one said we never ask for it because it's never approved anymore. In two different testimonies at two different times, and that could have saved the warfighters that night. Also that night, the AC-130 overhead asking to engage multiple times enemy combatants on the ground was not allowed to engage those enemy combatants with weapons. And it's very likely that one of those enemy combatants took that chopper down that night. President Trump in August said that he was going to give more authority to the warfighters on the ground, to those people. And under President Obama, a lot of that authority, as you made an earlier comment tonight, was being done by people back in Washington, D.C., inside the White House, who had never seen the theater of war, who had never been in the battlefield at night with their buddies with bullets whizzing by their head.
That makes all the difference. Billy Vaughn and Karen Vaughn, thank you for everything you've done for the warfighter, for your son's sacrifice. And there are 70,000 dead ISIS fighters in the last year and a half that are a credit to the unleashing we have done for our military. Billy Vaughn,
yes, sir. You can see
night.
what our military can do.
You got
Thanks,
it. Thanks a lot. Thanks
Pete.
a lot. Well, that is all the time we have here on the Ingram Angle tonight. I'm Pete Hegseth, in for Laura Ingram. My good friend, Ed Henry, who's filling in for Shannon Breen, is up next. Good evening, Ed.
I'm used to saying good morning to you when we're on Fox and Friends.
I already messed it up once, so you can take it away here.
That's right. Good to see you, buddy. Happy New Year, almost.
You got it.